call this May 11th, 2022 Board of Education meeting to order. Mr. Anagnostou, would you take the roll?
Mrs. Bissell?
Here.
Mrs. Cobain?
Here.
Mr. Miko?
Here.
Ms. Stochek?
Here.
Mrs. Hausum?
Here.
We are all present. Would you please stand and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Next on our agenda is our district goals. Our district goals remain the same: academic achievement and growth, financial prudence, and community engagement. We measure all our decisions by those three goals. I do have public comment today. Jess Koza.
My name is Jess Koza. I live at 9812 Hazelwood Avenue. Can you hear me? I feel like normally there's an echo. Maybe it's me. Okay. So I'm here on a whim. I wasn't actually planning on coming tonight, but I decided to call off of work because my son is having a difficult time. And you know, we've been talking so much and battling back and forth with Diversity Council and what it actually does. And I got to tell you, it breaks my heart to hear the rhetoric and everything that's being said about it, what people think is happening, and it's not true, you know. And I think many of you know me as a very avid volunteer. I keep up with education news. I feel like I have to. I didn't have an advocate when I was a child, and I will do everything in my power to make sure that my son is succeeding in school and feels accepted by his peers. But he's been coming home, and he's been telling me he wants to die. He's been telling me the other kids are calling him really horrible names that I just don't want to repeat on camera. Really horrible things. You know, we talk so much about pronouns. You know, I got pronouns that I'm afraid of too. Loser, idiot. You know, there's a whole list of them that I'm afraid of too. And I think that with Diversity Council and with the work that we need to do, we need to teach these kids that everybody's different. They're molded differently, and we can live with those differences. I'm having a very hard time explaining to my son why these things are happening. And I wish I had answers. I wish I could just put him in a bubble. I wish that I could make it go away because I was there and I know exactly how that feels. He's only 10 years old and he shouldn't be coming home and he shouldn't be telling me this. And I needed you to hear me talk about it. I need you to hear me talk. My kid is a good kid. He's a good kid, and everybody loves him. But his behavior the last couple of months, and I don't know what it is, he's reacting to whatever is happening. And all these kids need, they need something to help them understand each other. Because whether you think so or not, it is going to affect them academically, as well as mentally. So I'm just asking you to just please keep an open mind with Diversity Council and have conversations and don't be afraid of these things. We're living in a changing world, and my goodness, I hate it too. I hate it too. I grew up a certain way, and there's certain things that I stick to my guns about, but you know what? I try to keep an open mind, and I try to say it's not the 1990s where I grew up. It's 2020. Let's move on. Thank you.
Thank you, Jess. I appreciate your comments. Obviously, they're heartfelt. Dr. Riva will make sure to have the principal follow up. Thank you very much. Next on our agenda is Treasurer's Report. Mr. Anagnostou.
Thank you, Mr. Miko. I have one item for your consideration tonight, and it's an invoice order approval at the general fund. Be it resolved upon the recommendation of the treasurer that in accordance with the Ohio Revised Code for the after-effect invoices, the board approves the following invoice payment, and the treasurer be authorized to sign the fiscal certificate to Southwest General Hospital for health screenings. Purchase order 222709 dated 4/1/22 for $17,955, or $17,955, which was, the service was November 21st, or November of 2021. This was a planned expense. It's for healthcare biometric screenings. There was no purchase order in place at the time. We believed that it was going to come out of the consortium, but we have to pay, all the Southwest bills it to us. We pay Southwest, submit the invoice to the consortium, and they're going to reimburse us. So it was just more semantics or logistics, that there wasn't a purchase order in place.
Any questions for George? Dr. Ryba?
Thank you, Mr. Micko. I'm going to ask Erin Green, our curriculum director, to come join us to prepare her presentation. Every work session this year, we've been talking about ESSER positions, right? How have we utilized those federal dollars to help support our staff and our students to create better outcomes, address the pandemic, close gaps? And so Erin is not directly going to talk about an ESSER position, but we thought this was a good time to update on a new law that was passed a little bit ago, but is going to be enacted coming up, and how some of the work that we've done in our school district and how we've utilized some of our ESSER funds are helping to support and prepare this work that needs to be done, and some compliance and aspects that need to be made. But it's really good stuff for kids. It's good stuff to make sure that we're not having any kids fall through the cracks in terms of literacy. So you do have the slides in front of you, and I'm going to turn it over to Erin to guide us through this discussion this evening. So Erin?
Great, thank you. And I appreciate the time tonight to speak with you, share some information, like Dr. Ryba said, about a very important law. It went into law 2021, but actual implementation starts next year. So that's why you'll see the heightened awareness. And it's House Bill 436. It's also known as the dyslexia law. We just want to be cautious in how we're speaking of it, because as I'll talk about, it's an early indicator warning. So it doesn't mean if kids exhibit some of these red flags, if you will, when we assess them, it doesn't mean they have dyslexia, but it means that we do need to take a hard look at where they are with their skill sets and what we can do to move them along. So, you know, what is dyslexia? A lot of misinformation out there, but essentially it's a reading disorder, and most of it stems from phonological awareness. If you remember way back at the beginning of the year, we had Steve Owens present to us, and he talked a lot about the letters training. And so a big component of that is the phonological component, and all of our teachers went through the training this year. So if a student is exhibiting some of these signs, you know, they're slow in reading, or they have inaccuracies, maybe they're not comprehending, difficulty with written and spoken language, processing, etc. Again, it doesn't mean always that it's dyslexia, but sometimes it is. So it's a neurological in nature. So we are not going to actually diagnose dyslexia, but again, we can look at what are some of the targets, the warning, and the flags, if you will. So the three big ideas of the House bill, I'm going to go through the three big points, and then once I go through those, I'll talk about what we as a district are doing. So where are we in regards to implementation and meeting the law, and where do we still need to go? So the first big idea of this is districts are needing to administer annual reading screenings beginning next year. Phasing it in over 3 years, we have to provide PD to our teachers. And then the third bullet there talks about starting next year, each district has to establish a multisensory structured literacy certification process, which is a lot of fancy words for they have to have specialized training in order to meet the needs of students with dyslexia. And we need, as a district, to determine who are those teachers that are getting trained, what does that look like, what is the cycle for how they're going to be trained, and how are we going to utilize them best in our district. So we're going to start by screening all students. We already do that, but the intent of the law is to cast a wide net. So we screen all students. From there, we can deduce, who are struggling students. who are showing reading difficulties. After that, we do some intervention. We see how they respond to the intervention. We'll do another assessment, and from there, again, continue to really tailor the instruction for the student to see if they respond. 3 key points that I want to make sure that are very clear. There isn't just one single test for this is a new, I added this slide so you don't have this one.
I printed a little earlier. I must have.
There's no single test for dyslexia, so we can't just give a test and expect it to show dyslexia. It's not diagnosed through screening. So again, the screening is to cast that wide net so that we ensure that we do catch all the kids that need these interventions. And then the third point is super important. We can't diagnose dyslexia without seeing how students respond to effective instruction. If they haven't had quality instruction or interventions, we can't surmise or assume that there's a dyslexia tendency. So talking about, I'm going to try to give you just a brief overview of the screening components. Again, this is all law. It starts next year. So starting next school year, we need to screen all students, kindergarten through 3rd grade. The state has an approved list of Tier 1 screeners. The challenge is we do not yet have that list. They are working on it. They have recently asked for reviewers for the companies that submitted an RFP. So that should be coming soon. I feel very confident that what we use, Ames Web Plus, will be on that list. From all of the PD that I've attended and the networking, it is on other states that have this law or something similar. They do utilize Ames Web Plus. We've been told it's very likely that that will be accepted as one of our, or as an acceptable screener. If it is not, we have a lot of work to do really quickly. But again, I do believe it will be accepted. So second part then, if we receive, once we screen our kids, if there are any with at-risk scores in our reading subtests, we have to immediately start evidence-based targeted instruction. So what that means is find out where the deficits are, make sure that we are intervening, we're keeping track of, here's what we are doing in the classroom, here's how the student's responding. The law is very specific as far as timelines. So this is not our favorite part, but they say you get 6 weeks to intervene. After 6 weeks, and you must measure it week 2, 4, and 6 minimally, if you're not seeing progress, then you have to go to a Tier 2 screener. So, educationally and research-wise, 6 weeks isn't really long enough, but what we'll do is see if there's some progress. The law is variable on, or the interpretation of the law, whether it's no progress or not seeing significant progress. It's been worded in a couple different ways with the interpretation. So that being said, we give a Tier 2 screener. So what a Tier 2 screener is something that we as a district decide what we want that to be. It's going to hone in on really discrete skills. So it's not just the overarching, are they weak in phonemes, phonological awareness, but more, exactly what components are they struggling with? Because we're going to use that to tailor the intervention even more. If from the Tier 2 screener, there are still weaknesses present, then there's a lot of legal things that we need to do as a district. And it's fair. We need to make sure the parents get the assessment results. We need to let them know, what are typical reading skills development, where is your child in regard to that. Here are risk factors for dyslexia. Again, not saying the child has it, but here are some tendencies you may see. And then what are we as a district doing, evidence-wise? Again, it does not indicate dyslexia is present, but we're starting to see more of a pattern that we really need to address. The second big piece of this, professional development, the law says we have to have 18 hours of PD from a list of approved professional development courses. It's incremental in, it's implementation. So by the start of 23-24, teachers of K-1, including special ed teachers, need to have been trained with that 18 hours, meaning we would need to do it next year. And then you can see the progression, 24-25, they add the teachers of grades 2 and 3. And then by 25-26, special education teachers for students all the way through high school. So every special education teacher in the district. The other piece of the professional development, and this starts next year, we have to establish a certification process for teachers. So again, who is it? We're going to form a committee. Who is it that we want trained in specialized professional development? And it's an intense professional development. You receive a certificate after you have to do almost like a practicum with current students. So it is intense. Another slide that you may not have in front of you, but the law versus recommendations, there's been a lot of talk about this because there's a handbook that Ohio was charged with developing, and it needed to be out by the end of December. And then it was to be approved, and it's been delayed. But as of yesterday, it was approved. So if you've been in touch at all with this, it's actually the April version that they went ahead and approved. So we can see what I was nervous they would make a lot of changes and we would have to react quickly, but it's what was in the April handbook. So there are things in the handbook that are best practices, and then there's the law. And so we always want to tend to lean towards what is best practice for kids. We want to make sure that we're doing the best we can by kids. And then it also gives, what are some methods that we can utilize, what are some suggestions. And again, we're going to try and do this to the absolute best of our ability and follow the guidebook. So where are we with implementation? We went through, the three big pieces of it. Strongsville City Schools, where are we? And what do we need to do? The good news is we are in a really good place with a lot of this. There are some districts that don't do the 3 times a year benchmarking. We do that. We have done that since before I was in district. So for a good 10 years or so, we do the Ames Web Plus. We do it all the way through 5th grade. So that is a bonus as well. We do the interventions. We do the progress monitoring. You've heard our MTSS coordinators talk. You've heard some intervention specialists. We have data teams at the elementary. So again, a lot of this is in place. However, the bullets are things that we need to make sure that we are refining and or starting. So move-ins, anyone that moves into our district that wasn't assessed initially, we need to make sure that within 30 days we do this assessment. We do that for our younger students by law, but this, again, involves students 4th, 5th, and 6th as well. The 6th grade is a whole new piece for us. We don't typically do that. And it will be good to see where they are. Kindergarten, it talks about, and again, this is where there's a little discrepancy in the law because we have to do it anyhow, but the law says you need to test in January for your kindergarten students because right at the beginning of the year, they may not have all these skills. However, with the 3rd grade reading guarantee, we are mandated to test anyhow, so we're going to continue to test. But we need to make sure in January we're meeting all the requirements and we don't just kind of, forget that piece because we did everything in the fall with grades 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Have to ensure Ames Web Plus is an approved measure. That's a biggie. We want to make sure that there's different components of Ames Web Plus. We just need to make sure it aligns with what is being not recommended, but mandated in the guidebook. So, are we making sure nonsense word fluency or phonemic awareness, match those up. So if kindergarten, you need to do these measures, okay, we do those. Tier 2 screeners, we have an idea of what we want to use, but it is a local decision. What's going to be the best for us to get the data that we need in a time frame that we need it. The next to the last bullet there.
Do we have something that we think will be that we're already doing that would similar to Ames Web We're already doing Ames Web.
Right.
Do
So
we
we
have
have a-
something at a tier 2 level that we're already using?
To some degree. So we have what's called a past assessment. When we started with the science of reading and the literacy coaches, we would bring that in when students were struggling. So it's an individualized assessment, and again, it goes through multiple layers to find the discrete skill set where the student's struggling. We've talked briefly as a committee already, and we feel that would be a really good measure, but I also want to hear what other districts are doing, making sure that there's not something even better out there. I feel pretty confident that we will end up with that, because it's very comprehensive with the early literacy skills. The time frame I talked about, we need to make sure that we're doing the 2-week check-ins, and then at 6 weeks, like, we need to say, have they made progress, have they not made progress, and what do we do next? And then the last one, we've gotten really good at this over the last few years, but the interventions we're putting in place, they have to be evidence-based. So we're not just doing, do some silent reading, that should help you grow. Evidence-based, they show results with kids. Next page. We've already built a multidisciplinary team. So we have a team of, it's quite a few people, but MTSS coach and director of special ed, we have teachers, and we have our literacy coaches and principals. That's kind of our core team. So starting next year, we need to make sure, let me go back here. We need to make sure we're communicating with parents in the required timeframes. So they give us 30 days. Once you do the tier 1, you get 30 days to communicate. Tier 2, same thing. We need to make sure we're providing information to parents in all the manners in which they are telling us we need to. That first bullet, I'll go back to that. We already have a team that will do the administration of, the screening, the intervention, and then analyzing the results. Again, that's what we do. We do it, I think, 5 times a year in our schools. We have the principal, we have a host of people sit and talk about the kids, those who are struggling. What can we do? Are the interventions working? Do we need to change the goal? So again, we're in a good place there. With PD, professional development, this past year, as you know, we trained all of our K through 3rd grade teachers and our intervention specialists with the first module of letters. So it was a 2-day training. It gave them 12 hours, and letters is an approved measure. So we're good. We have 12 hours. However, they're going to get a lot more hours. So next school year, we're planning on doing modules 2, 3, and 4 of letters, which will give our teachers 36 hours. Part of the law is we have to make sure that we are educating everybody, all of our professionals. So our special area teachers, our PE and music and art, they need to do a 6-hour training. Our gifted intervention specialists who don't work directly with reading, we want to ensure that they still have the knowledge and the skill sets as well. So they'll receive training. When we get new teachers to the district, which we know is inevitable and a good thing, we're going to have to make sure they get that first module of letters before we can move on. We will do the following, not next year, but the following year. Our goal is to do modules 5 through 8. And then what we have to get to is training all of our special ed teachers, grades 4 through 12, by the 24-25 school year. And that's a big charge. There are a lot of special ed teachers in the district. I know that they are clamoring for the information because we had quite a few middle school intervention specialists reach out to me and reach out to Steve when we were doing the training. And they said, can we be a part of this? What we're hearing is it's really good, really helpful. So I think that will be advantageous. It's just going to, again, take some more planning on our end. And then we've already talked about that August professional development day that we have with teachers. We need to make sure that staff understand this law because we haven't gone through it yet. So they need to know what are the procedures, what are the mandates, what do we need to change, adapt, adjust, or continue to do. The other piece is performance matters analytics, component of the technology that we have already. We're just going to ensure our teachers are utilizing that because it's a nice way to display where kids are with regard to interventions. So that's going to be a brief PD on that August day as well. Where are we with certification? So this is, again, that literacy certification process. Yes,
Performance matters, analytics, is that something the parent will have access to?
I do, well,
I don't know.
Dave, no. The answer is no. So what it is it hosts the data from the kid, from as long as they've been in school, and it kind of, please correct me if I misspeak, but it gives us a pattern. It gives us, again, warning indicators, absence information is in there. So it's more of a tool for teachers. If parents have access? Mhm. I'll be honest, I'm not super familiar with this, but I can ask Andy. He's been taking the charge.
If I'm a parent, I would want to be able to receive the information.
Okay, I will ask, yep. Continuing with the certification, this is where we have to decide who in our district do we want to get trained even more than the letters training. So unfortunately, the letters training is not an accredited training, accredited plus, forgive me. It's accredited, but you need to be accredited plus to meet this. We do have Wilson Level 1, Wilson Level 2, that we have teachers already trained in. So what we're going to need to do is sit down and say, okay, at each building, who is trained, who do we need to have trained, what will this look like, cost analysis, the rollout, we can't have all of our teachers out 1 year getting trained. So we need some clarity for ratios. They're leaving a lot of it up to local discretion. You don't have to have every teacher in grades K through 3 trained, but we want to have enough so that it's not, we have one per building. And these teachers will specifically work with students who need interventions. Again, everybody will be trained as teachers, but these will be highly certified, if you will, Wilson Level 1, Wilson Level 2. So we use it a lot with some of our students in Tier 3 when we're talking MTSS. So it will continue to build our capacity as a district. I have 2 more slides, and they are just overall takeaways. So a couple areas to reiterate where we need to continue to build and evolve. We know we have some work ahead of us. We need to review now that the guidebook is finalized, approved. We as a team will sit down and review, what is best practice, what is law, where are we going to meet in the middle, and what do we need to do to make decisions. We have to work out that certification process. Do we want to continue with Wilson training? If so, same things I've said, who and when and how are we going to place kids in those classrooms? And then we want to ensure that affected staff and families are educated, so they know why are we doing the testing. The Ames Web piece isn't new, but they may get information sent home. We need the staff to be in the loop, all staff, even if they're 5th grade and they may not directly deal with this or work with the kids at that level. They need to know about it, 6th grade as well. So those are some big takeaways. And then lastly, some things that we're proud of because we've already put these in place. We do the Ames Web already. They say once a year, but best practice is 3 times a year. It's already ingrained in our district that we do it 3 times a year. And we do grades K through 5, which is expansive. You only need to do K through 3. The second bullet I talked a little bit about, but at every building, they have data meetings. They have their interventionists, they have their MTSS coordinators, their coaches. Everybody's sitting around the table, and they're looking at kids. And they're saying, where are the kids struggling? What are the skill sets that they need? And how are we going to help these kids? And then we progress monitor. Is it working? If not, we need to look at, is it something we're doing or not doing? Or is it something where we need to take a deeper dive or back up a level in the skill set? The MTSS coordinators, especially the elementary one, Lindsay is going to have a huge role in this because she's an expert, and we're going to rely a lot on her because she's at all 5 buildings to keep the continuity, to keep us on track. But again, we have that whole team. And then the other piece is that letters training module. We are lucky to have Steve as our in-house expert. And what he's teaching through letters is exactly what the law calls for. So it's that structured literacy approach. It's explicit, it's not a program, but it's how do we need to teach kids in a way that where they will make progress using the science of reading, using everything we have learned about the brain and how you learn to read. So I'd be glad to take questions that you have or thoughts about this.
We've spent a lot of time on science of reading, and that's a 3-year project, et cetera.
Correct.
Does this fit in?
It's a-
Do we need to relook at it? Is it a lot of bureaucracy, but is it just paperwork to fill out? How is this actually going to affect a student?
So it's 100% aligned. We were lucky in the fact that we got our literacy coaches a couple years back and had them trained in the science of reading, knowing that this is where Ohio was going with their literacy plan. So the law aligns directly with science of reading and what we're doing. The law is, I'll say, more for districts that aren't doing these things. We have districts that, for whatever reason, are not already doing these. So it's going to be a very heavy lift for them. We're doing the vast majority of it, but the piece that we're going to implement that will make it even better for kids is that Tier 2 assessment. And so we will drill down. We do some of that right now, but it's not structured, and that was a goal for next year anyhow. If a kid is flagged with some of the tendencies or markers of dyslexia, we're going to start digging deep. Where is the kid struggling? How can we best assist? So, I would say a little bit of bureaucracy, but I also think it's a good it's a good law in that parents know where their kids are. It's not a surprise. 30 days after taking the test, they get results. 30 days after the second test, they get results, they get information. What is the district doing for my child? And this ties in with what we're already doing with the 3rd grade reading guarantee. So we already send RIMPs. That will mesh together, and all of our focus will be on a direct impact to how do we teach kids to read.
Was this going to lead to anything that we're not doing right now? We talked about how it doesn't necessarily identify dyslexia.
Correct.
But at some point, it would be identify a student with dyslexia. Are we going to do anything different at that point?
I talked with Andy, special ed, or pupil services, who handles special ed, and we talked, students who have specific reading or specific learning disability in reading tend to have very similar profiles to those with dyslexia. So we will continue to instruct in the manner that we do for students with dyslexia because they're going to respond well to that systematic, explicit instruction. Will we get a few more identified? Possibly. And that's a good thing. With Child Find, we have to make sure that we are finding the kids that have disabilities. I don't want to say kids fall through the cracks, but this will ensure that there's no chance. We are on the data every year and continually looking at it, which again, I think is only beneficial for our kids. So I think we're in a good place, and I think the law is a good thing.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Aaron.
You're welcome.
I think one of the things this shares is, Mr. Mickel, I appreciate your questions because there's a lot of complexity to this, right? The good thing is we're, as Aaron said, we're doing a lot of this work already. We have a lot of the pieces in place. So taking a look at the foresight of our directors and the board to support this, to say, let's start working on letter training. That's something we see as a need for our students. Let's enhance with our Ames Web Plus. Let's look at some of the, Haggerty is something that the curriculum department introduced a few years ago to address some of that phonological awareness, looking at the Tier 2. So I would say with some of those aspects, we have to become more systemic with it, but we've got the good foundation that is there and that helps support the work that we're doing. So, some of these laws, unfortunately, laws that we have to comply with, right? And sometimes we scratch our head to say, how are these going to make a difference for the kids on a daily basis? I think as Strongsville City Schools, we do a very good job of doing what's best for kids in the area of early literacy and reading. These additional layers will help out. I don't think it's going to be a massive structural shift. A lot of that stuff, evidence-based interventions, we provide those for students. The progress monitoring, we do that for students, and we've built that over the years. But it adds a few new layers that are not going to do anything but help. So,
Good to hear.
yeah. With that, I'm going to ask Steve Bruckner, our operations manager, to come up. But to kind of kick off our discussion item, last time, you have the green Excel sheet printout in front of you. Steve presented information to the board. We had a lengthy discussion last time about the restructuring of business services and transportation in terms of clerical support. That is, on the agenda. You gave us consensus to move forward. That's on the agenda for your consideration. So we're down to this front page. Again, to reorient everybody, you've got the pre-COVID staffing levels. Then you've got currently what is in place. Then we've given two options, option A and B. Steve has recommended, and I support the recommendation for option A. We've given 2 weeks for the board to consider that. And if you have any, why don't we start with any questions or additional points of clarity we can provide, and then we can go from there with the goal of getting consensus from the board as to which option you would prefer us to move forward with, or if there's an option kind of that's a meshing of multiple choices. So any questions from board members since the last time we met about the various options or understanding the rationale for the recommendation?
So what's the two, ultimately, we increased the amount of custodial staff due to the COVID pandemic.
Correct.
There were a number of things that we did during that we don't do anymore, or at least we will be stopping doing. As far as, I don't believe we still use the misters on the bus, things like that.
We do, but more, not during, we do use the misters, but more of like before we leave for the weekend, so it's clean for Monday. Depending on the building usage, elementaries use it more if they don't have events. But, just the frequency in which we were doing the cleaning during the school day, it has relaxed from when we were under COVID protocol.
So we were going, pre-COVID, we were 340 hours a day. During COVID and now, we're 377. And choice is 374 versus 352. The thing that resonates with me is is paying people to just travel between buildings, right? So reducing that seems like a positive. But the difference between the two options are the 22 hours. What am I going to see different if we invest those 22 hours?
Well, I can tell you, if you don't invest in the 22 hours, you want me to approach it that way first?
Sure.
Okay, so if we go with option.
Somehow we need to define the difference.
Yeah, I mean, really where the difference is going to be seen is the elementary schools. Because the high school and middle school are pretty static on this, regardless of the choice. Where you're going to see the most efficiency with Plan B is that you're cutting back, really you're cutting back to pre-COVID levels at most of those buildings. And they just were not being cleaned up to what I thought was an appropriate standard. And that's all in theory, right? That's anecdotal. The reality of it, of what's going to happen is, when you reduce a building the size of Sarrar, Chapman, and Whitney down to 12 hours, you can't expect an 8-hour person to do 75% of the building and the 4-hour person to do 25%. It's just not feasible. There's not enough physical capacity in those 8 hours to do that. So what we're going to be forced to do, and what I would instruct the head custodians to do, is that we would have to thoroughly clean one side of the building every other day. And that 4-hour person then would have to do what we call a pickup, which is basically trash, sweep the hallways, get as much visible as you can done, get bathrooms done in that amount of time. That's what you're going to see with Plan B, where, yes, that building's going to be clean on Friday, but it's going to take us almost twice as long to get there, and we have to keep flip-flopping. With Plan A, while you do see that that's where the 22 hours is invested, is that not only are the smaller elementary staffed with 2 individuals in the evening, so it can be divided in half and then cleaned properly every single evening, you're also giving the larger schools, elementary schools of Kinsner and Maraski, some of that help that can be strategically placed in the office areas, in the gymnasiums, so that those areas can be cleaned and the academic areas can be cleaned fully as well. Where that's going to be affected in Plan B is you're going to be pre-COVID levels where you have 2 custodians in a much bigger building, and we're going to have to be creative with it, almost divide the building where one 8-hour person does these rooms, the other one does these, and then we shortchange some of those academic hallways to get the common areas done and keep flip-flopping. It won't be as dramatic as in the smaller elementaries, but it's still going to be the same principle that we do not have enough person power to clean the buildings fully every night under Plan B.
Steve, I'm looking at option A, let's say Kinsner or Maraski. Can you remind me of, is that 2 full-time day and 2 full-time night of 7 hours each? Like, what is the breakdown?
No, so what it ends up being is there's 4 custodians each night. There's 4 custodians total in a 24-hour period. You have the head custodian there who works days.
And how many hours is that?
That's 7.5, 8 hours, so with lunch and that.
They're
8 hours.
Okay.
And then you have 2 evening custodians that are 8 hours, and 1 evening custodian that's 4 hours, that will split 4 hours at Maraski and 4 hours at Kinsner. So those buildings will be duplicate in the number of hours that they have.
So 1 daytime, 2.5 evening?
Yes.
And then for the other 3, it's 1 daytime and 2 evening. The preschool is 1 day and a partial evening.
I'm comfortable based on your recommendation, Cameron. I'm not in the elementary schools, but keeping them clean is important. So based on your recommendation, I'm comfortable with supporting it.
Option A.
Mhm.
I would rather have the whole school clean.
Yeah, I agree with you.
It's my idea, especially the lower grades, 'cause
The thing about option B that makes me uncomfortable with option B is like both Chapman and Kinsner actually go down lower than the pre-COVID hours. And that seems weird to me. So that's like, for me, that's tricky.
oh yeah,
So, I mean, for me, that makes that not a real feasible option. How could we go down lower than before when we were already saying it wasn't clean enough? So I'm on board with option A too.
Okay, thank you very much. We will, really what this does for us, as George said last time, this is already in the forecast. There will be a reduction in 3 hours, and then, Jenny and Steve will work together to, that maybe just be an open position, or, so we'll either have to do a reduction in force, but we'll work through that.
We still have to get the employees to begin with,
Yes.
and that's a challenge.
Yes, it is. Yeah.
So this is a goal.
It is, yeah. Thank you, Steve. Why don't you continue with your next item?
All right, the next item on the agenda is a copier printer lease agreement. Be it resolved upon the recommendation of the superintendent that the Board of Education approves the awarded 5-year lease agreement for colors and printers with Meritech with monthly payments of $2,004.87, not to exceed the amount of $120,292.20 over 5 years, and this funding is to be from the Permanent Improvement Fund. I also, and I do apologize to the board that I did not have the numbers
Should we do the
in time to
motion
have
and
it
have the
published
discussion?
here. Go ahead.
To be proper?
Go ahead. Rick.
Should we do the motion and then have the discussion to be proper?
He can, I think with a second option, we might need a second motion.
Okay,
So it might be better to,
let's talk about it and then we'll do motions.
yeah.
Go for it.
So another option that we could have, and I do have the numbers written down, but I don't have it published again, I apologize to the board, is to not go with the lease option, but to go with an outright purchase of these machines. Either way, just to give you the background information, these machines are over 9 years old. Some of them don't even have parts available anymore, and they haven't for 2 years, which means once they break down, Meritech is then looking for older machines that have broken down in their graveyard and pulling some of those parts and seeing what pieces and parts we can put together. It's been one of my goals in this process of copiers and printers to bring the whole fleet up to a status that I feel it should be. We had 4 years ago, we had a makeover of about 70% of the fleet, and we moved to more, they call them the bigger machines, the bigger fax machines, printers, copiers, scanners. At one point, we had invested in printers, and those are just much more substantial in their cost to upkeep and also the cost per page. The larger copiers are just much more economical. So this is the second step of that plan. The reason that I had recommended the lease is because it did fit into my 5-year forecast. But it came to light that I should also present the board with the option of just purchasing outright, and that would be a savings. So the cost, if we just were to purchase these machines outright, would be $101,256.06, which would generate a savings of $19,036.14. The leasing interest was 3% a year that we would have locked into. So, those two recommendations are there. There's also something in here more than just the machines. In the purchase is something called e-Gold Fax. So what this is, and this opportunity was made available or recommended to me, instead of using what's termed POTS lines, and I'd have to have Jim here to tell me what POTS means. I just know it's capital P-O-T-S, so I'm sure it's something very profound.
It's plain old telephone service.
All right, maybe not as profound as I thought. So there you go. So we have POTS lines here, and the POTS lines are the plain old telephone service. Those cost us about $30 a month, somewhere between $25 and $30 a month. It's time to move away from that because we have the infrastructure to still have faxes transmitted, but have them transmitted over our fiber and our Ethernet cables. What would have precluded us in the past from doing this is we didn't have the infrastructure in place. A lot of times companies will do this and they also then have to purchase new machines. With the machines that we purchased 4 years ago and with these current machines, we could basically turn all of our machines for a greatly reduced cost into fax machines. The end user wouldn't see the difference. And people faxing us would not see the difference. They would still go to their fax machine, type in the number, it would come over the wires, but our cloud would then turn that fax, what would be fax, into information that spits out of our scanners, fax, printers, copiers. It would send it out just the same. It's just not using the old telephone system to do it. And again, it's a fraction of the cost. The cost is baked into the 5-year lease agreement, the 5-year agreement either way. The $101,000 includes that cost as well as the lease agreement. It's honestly, for the cost difference, it's the way to go. We're kind of in the dark ages in my mind when we come to the faxes and trying to find out, okay, well, is this machine a fax machine? Nope, nothing dialed out. Go down the hallway, see if that one's a fax machine. This one, all of our machines become fax machines for a greatly reduced cost.
Is there a benefit to leasing versus buying? You said how there's like the graveyard of printers, if something goes wrong with it and we need it fixed, in buying it, we would not be able to get parts as easily, most likely, and in leasing, they automatically will fix that, or no?
No, if we buy them, we're still under, there's a separate agreement for service and parts and
Okay.
labor, so that would come over.
Okay.
The true savings is we're saving 3%. We're saving
Okay.
the 19,000 over 5 years.
Right.
So we're just not investing the money into the financing, we're just purchasing it outright. So,
And what I would also add in, I'm sorry, Michelle, you're
No,
about
go
to
ahead.
say something. Would also add in, so as Steve mentioned, the monthly payments, the annual monthly payments fit into his PI budget. The overall purchase does not. So if we go with the second option to make the purchase, we would need to, either if we have general fund savings this year, which we may, utilize those, or use our cash reserves and do a transfer from the general fund to the PI budget to pay for the outright purchase of it. So if option 2 is selection, the outright purchase, at the next board meeting, I'll probably come to you with the transfer from 001 to 003 to allow for the purchase of these.
Ultimately, George, what are we making on our savings right now?
So right now,
Interest-wise?
the Star Ohio rate, last Thursday, it gets updated every Thursday. So last Thursday was 0.5, 0.5%. Tomorrow, I was just talking to our investment advisor, tomorrow it might be 0.7%.
So ultimately, what we're considering is loaning ourselves the money, or instead of borrowing the money, just paying for it. And we will realize a savings, because all we would get to hold that $100,000 back is
0.5%.
0.5%, and if we're lucky, a little more next week, whereas we would save 3%. So I think that financially, if we go back to our goals, financial prudence, it makes sense to purchase it outright. It's a better use of the taxpayers' money. As far as the faxing is concerned, do we need to port all 18 lines? And is there
I don't know why we would
cost
keep-
savings to that?
There's a cost savings to porting all 18 over, and there would be really no,
No, what I'm saying is do we need all 18 lines?
oh, it's not like 18 to 18. It's getting rid of the 18 and just turning on e-gold fax. So you don't have, like I said, it's not 18 machines, it's all 70 machines turned into fax machines. I don't know why we would leave one of the plain old television.
No,
or
what I'm saying
telephones.
is right now, you send a fax so that it can go to this building or this machine. You have a different phone number to go to another machine. You have a different phone number to go to another machine. If we have a way to route it electronically, I'm assuming the emails are gonna show up as, assuming the faxes will be delivered as emails. Do we need 18 lines with e-fax, e-gold fax? And that might be a
I'd have to look at that, but,
David/Jim
I mean,
question.
the 18 numbers were included in the price. So you're saying reduce the amount of
If it
phone
low-
lines
if
to
it
the.
if it lowers the price,
It
and it
wouldn't.
doesn't lower what we need.
It wouldn't lower the price in e-gold fax. Because
Okay.
e-gold fax is, I mean, you could have 70 different telephone numbers and it'd still be the same price for e-gold fax. Does that answer your question?
It does.
Okay.
And then do we need, how did we come up with 750 pages a month?
We looked at the average of what we're doing every year. And it all depends. Beginning of the year, we get closer to 750. In the doldrums of faxing throughout the year, we're closer to 550, 600. The cutoff is between 500 and 750. So if we lowball it, we're going to be paying 9 cents more for every page. So I just went with the higher average to save the money overall and not have any additional cost.
Okay. I have a feeling in 5 years, we won't need e-fax anymore. So,
So now we need to make a motion for which option we want to go with.
So be it resolved upon the recommendation of the superintendent that the Board of Education, do we need to do both and then reject one?
Well,
Or
since
can
we
I
haven't
just read
made,
it?
since we didn't make this motion,
I can just audible the motion.
right,
Okay. So be it resolved upon the recommendation of the superintendent that the Board of Education approves the awarded 5-year purchase.
just the
no, it's not-
purchase,
be a
just the
purchase.
purchase.
Awarded purchase of copiers, printers, and other services with Meritech
In the
for a
amount,
total purchase price of $101,200, not to exceed $101,256.06. Funding to be from the
permanent
Permanent
improvement
Improvement
fund.
Fund.
But there will be a transfer coming from the general. That would be outside the motion.
That'll be outside of the motion. They say it right.
You did.
Close enough. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
Motion by Mrs. Hausum, second by Mrs. Stavcek. Any further discussion? So just to memorialize it, we're making the purchase because we have the funds in our general fund, which is something new, but we also want to be good stewards of the taxpayer dollar, and this is a way to save on, not excess, but interest payments that we don't need to endure. Any other? Please take the roll.
Mrs. Hausum,
Yes.
Ms. Stochek,
Yes.
Mrs. Bissell,
Yes.
Mrs. Cobain,
Yes.
Mr. Miko.
Yes, and the motion carries.
Thank you, Steve. We have a couple items on our human resources tonight, and so I'll turn it over to Jenny.
Thank you, Dr. Ryba. Under Human Resources, I have the following recommendations for your consideration. As we talked about the whole restructuring of the custodial plan, this was the first step that we discussed at the previous meeting. So be it resolved upon the recommendation of the superintendent that the following non-certificated positions be abolished effective July 1, 2022. So we are abolishing a custodian in the evening between the high school and the middle school, again, eliminating the travel. That's 7 hours a day. We are also abolishing a custodian at the high school that goes between the high school and support services at 7 hours a day. And we are also going to abolish the district secretary position in the business services department. That's 7.5 hours per day with a idea to restructure those positions. Under C2, we have 2 retirements. Again, be it resolved upon the recommendation of the superintendent that the following certificated retirements be accepted. So we have Todd Clifford, art teacher at the high school, and Janine Schultz, intervention specialist at the middle school. And we are actively planning our celebration for May 26th at our board meeting. That will be at the high school. We'll have a reception that starts at 6:15 for all our retirees that we've had throughout the year in the agenda. And that concludes my report.
Thank you, Jenny. And just to kind of close the loop, as to we've abolished the positions we talked about, when do we see the new positions created? That's actually when we place people in those positions based on either a 3-day post or an interview process. So we'll point those out, but that's when you'll see those new positions be created, and you'll vote on that. And with that, Mr. Miko, that concludes my report.
Any questions? I'm sure the art department won't be able to continue without Mr. Clifford, but we'll find a way. Consent calendar, action by the Board of Education and adoption of the consent calendar at this point of the agenda means all items appearing in this agenda with asterisks are adopted by a single motion unless requested otherwise. Do I have any otherwise? Hearing none, do I have a motion?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
Motion by Mrs. Hausum, second by Ms. Stavcek. Any discussion? Hearing none, please take the roll.
Mrs. Hausum,
Yes.
Ms. Stochek,
Yes.
Mrs. Bissell,
Yes.
Mrs. Cobain,
Yes.
Mr. Miko.
Yes, and the motion carries. Next is Board of Education other. Do we have any others?
Yes, Mr. Miko, I just wanted to congratulate our top 5% of our graduating class 2022 students. There were 27 kids recognized last night. I was able to attend. It's amazing to hear the kids talk, and I recognize a lot of them because I have a daughter graduating this year. And the kids that, they're in band, they're varsity soccer players, runners. A child ran off the baseball field and came in to accept his award. It was really cool to see. They're very well-rounded students that we have at the high school. And to hear them talk about their teachers and, what teachers influenced them. They went back to their, 4th and 5th grade teachers, which I thought was really, really cool to hear about. One student even talked about a word problem that he was given by a 5th grade teacher about 1,000 lockers, and if you close the odds, and I don't know, he lost me then. But it was a really great event, and really proud of these kids and all of our graduating seniors in 2 to 3 weeks.
It leads well, and graduation is just around the corner. Any others? Hearing none, we do have reason for executive session on the topics of.
To consider the employment, dismissal, discipline, demotion of a public employee and to review negotiations with public employees concerning their compensation or other terms and conditions of their employment.
Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
Motion by Mrs. Hausum, second by Mrs. Cobain. Any discussion? Hearing none, please take the roll.
Mrs. Hausum,
Yes.
Ms. Cobain,
Yes.
Mr. Miko,
Yes,
Ms. Stochek,
Yes.
Mrs. Bissell.
Yes.
motion carries. We will enter into executive session at 8:05. We have no expectation of further business. Thank you for your attention and have a nice evening.